If you want to learn Japanese, conquering Kana should be your first quest. Unfortunately, you can't just download the Japanese writing systems into your head like in the Matrix. Trust me, I've tried. But don't worry, there's a method that's almost as cool with no kung fu required. In this video, I'll show you how to master Japanese Hiragana and Katakana using an adult-friendly approach that even Neo-san would love. Whoa. Plus, I'll share my favorite self-study resources and a suggested study schedule that'll make you a Kana wizard in 12 days or less. All right, ready to crack the Kana code? Let's dive in. Japanese writing is a unique blend of 3 different scripts, not just one: kanji, hiragana, and katakana. Why 3 writing systems for one language? No, this is not an elaborate plot to torture Japanese children or we adult language learners. It turns out that each script is used for a specific orthographical purpose. Kanji are complex characters borrowed from China, used to write most nouns and the stems of verbs and adjectives in Japanese. Most publications in Japan are limited to the official list of 2,136 regular use kanji, or jōyō kanji. Hiragana are used to write grammatical endings on verbs and adjectives, grammatical particles, words with rare kanji outside that list of regular use kanji I just mentioned, and kanji readings of Japanese origin found in dictionaries called kunyomi. Katakana, on the other hand, are used to write foreign names and loanwords, onomatopoeia, sound effects, and kanji readings of Chinese origin, which are called onyomi, that you'll see in dictionaries. Hiragana and katakana are collectively known as kana, and you can actually see that word within the words hiragana and katakana. Each of these includes 46 basic syllables. And what's wild is that both hiragana and katakana represent the exact same sounds, but they are written differently to set them apart in writing. This may seem like an extraneous distinction for you right now, but eventually you will come to appreciate this orthographical distinction. In general, hiragana are more rounded, as you can see here, and katakana are more angular, like this. This is because hiragana were originally taken from the cursive brush form of certain Chinese characters with the same or similar pronunciation, while katakana were taken from chunks of certain characters that had that same pronunciation. For example, the hiragana for a, which looks like this, comes from the cursive form of the kanji an, which looks like this. Whereas the katakana for a is taken from the left side of this character, which is also pronounced a. And speaking of katakana, fun fact, did you know that the iconic code used in the Matrix movies, the green letters, falling down the screen, was actually taken from backwards versions of katakana symbols? Whoa. Unlike English, which is written with combination of letters, each representing discrete consonants and vowels, each kana symbol represents a syllable, either a consonant-vowel combination or just a vowel on its own. So technically speaking, hiragana and katakana are not alphabets, but rather syllabaries. Japanese kana are traditionally represented in a table called the goju-on, which literally means 50 sounds. It is so named because the table has 5 rows and 10 columns. 5 times 10, 50. But as you can see in the table here, 5 of the boxes are empty in modern Japanese, and there is another extra sound right at the bottom hanging out all on its own. If you add these all together, you get 46 sounds, represented by 92 kana. So 46 hiragana again, and the same sounds represented by 46 katakana. Japanese uses a standard order for kana, just like how we alphabetize the 26 letters in English, A, B, C, D, E. In Japanese, the sequence begins with the vowels in the order a, I, u, e, o, then the K column, ka, ki, ku, ke, ko, then the S column, sa, shi, su, se, so, etc., all the way through. Now, traditionally, the goju-on is presented from right to left, just like the Japanese language is written. I've created mine that goes from left to right, so it's a little bit more intuitive for native English speakers. In my table, I've placed romaji, which is romanized Japanese using English letters, on the top. Then you have hiragana in the middle and katakana at the bottom. See the link in the description for a free print-ready version of this table that you can download and then print out at home for easy access. Before we move on, I want to quickly point out a few of the quirks about the table. As I said, you'll notice that the sound is chilling all by itself right at the bottom of the table. O. This is because the n sound joined in Japanese relatively late in its evolution, under the influence of Chinese vocabulary that was borrowed into Japanese. Many Chinese words do end in a n syllable final sound, whereas native Japanese words do not. For example, the following three words, along with their Chinese-inspired pronunciations, were all borrowed into Japanese from Chinese. First, we have the Sino-Japanese word for three, which is san, and this is actually still how it's pronounced in Mandarin as well. Now, if you're curious, Japanese did already have a word for the number three, which is still used in certain cases, along with other native Japanese counting conventions. But most of the time, these Sino-Japanese numbers, ichi, ni, san, are what's used. Next, we have the Sino-Japanese word bendina, which means convenient. And then last, we have the word for Chinese characters in Japanese, kanji, which literally means Chinese characters, or more literally, Han characters. Curious why there are empty boxes in the table? Turns out that two of the possible consonant-vowel combinations were in fact used in archaic Japanese, but have since fallen out of use. These include wi and we, which look like this. But there are still three other slots which actually were never used. That is, these sound combinations don't exist in Japanese. Yi, ye, and wu. So the moniker 50 sounds is obviously more of a convenient narrative than a literal truth. But as they say, why let the truth get in the way of a good story? Okay, here's the bad news. If you want to get fully literate in Japanese, and I hope you do, you eventually need to be able to read all 2,136 Jōyō kanji that I mentioned earlier. This process takes most learners a few years of dedicated study. Trinity! Help! But the good news is learning Kana takes a lot less time, usually only 20 to 30 hours on average. And mastering Kana unlocks three key advantages that you can enjoy right away. Number one, you develop better pronunciation. While you can render Japanese into English letters using romaji I mentioned earlier, this can lead to English interference problems and really bad pronunciation habits. Learning Kana helps you learn to pronounce Japanese as Japanese people do. Number two, you unlock basic literacy. Learning Kana is the first step toward full Japanese literacy. You need to know Hiragana to read grammatical particles, verb endings, etc., as I mentioned earlier. And Katakana is necessary to write your own name, read sound effects in manga, and thousands of modern loanwords. It turns out that if you speak English, you already sort of know thousands of Japanese words. You just have to learn how to pronounce them in a Japanese way. And that means knowing how to pronounce and read katakana. And even after you do learn kanji, kana are still used alongside them in most sentences. Kana gives you access to authentic Japanese resources. Without kana, you're limited to boring learner-specific materials written in romaji. Kana unlocks a treasure trove of interesting Japanese content intended for native speakers. For example, many Japanese comic books have little hiragana reading guides next to the kanji or above the kanji called furigana. So if you read kana, you can start to read comics, things like One Piece, even if you can't yet read kanji. Before I get to the best way to learn kana, let me start with the worst way, rote repetition. Most Japanese teachers and textbooks advise new learners to simply write out each hiragana and katakana dozens or even hundreds of times. They even sell special workbooks with squares and writing guides to help you do this. While such repetition may help improve your penmanship, it does very little to help you actually remember the kana, especially in cases when you can't copy from the model and have to try to recognize or write a kana from memory. This blunt force approach also happens to be boring as hell, highly ineffective and inefficient, and extremely time-consuming. Rote memorization may be the default approach, but that doesn't mean it's the best approach. It turns out there is a superior method that is far more fun and effective, takes much less time and energy, and aligns with how the adult brain builds new memories. What, pray tell, is this magical method? One word: mnemonics. Mnemonics are memory aids that help new information stick through association with existing memories and your unique life experiences. Fun fact, in Japanese, the word for mnemonics is kyokujutsu, which literally means memory techniques. Now, there are many different kinds of mnemonics. You maybe even use some yourself when learning the names of the planets, for example, back in elementary school. But for our purposes here, we're going to leverage what are called visual mnemonics or image-based mnemonics. These will help you associate each hiragana and katakana with English letters and words that then trigger what they should look like and sound like. Instead of trying to force the kana into your head through tedious rote memory, you will instead leverage the power of association, graphical coincidences, and phonetic cues to to make sticky memories you can't forget. Now, it's not as quick as plugging into the Matrix, but at least you don't have to drill a hole in the back of your head. Okay, let's try a few now. I'm going to show you how to memorize the hiragana for A and I and the katakana for A and I. So first up, here is the hiragana A. Now, at first look, it may seem like there's nothing there to attach your memories, your brain to. But if you look closely, you can actually see that there is a capital English letter A hiding inside of this, which can then trigger the memory of the pronunciation ah. Pretty cool, right? So cool, in fact, you may find yourself exclaiming aha. So there's one more for you. Now it's written as follows. First, a horizontal stroke from left to right. Next, a vertical stroke going from top to bottom. And last, a curlicue stroke starting in the upper right, moving down to the lower left, and finishing in the lower right. And hey, now you know your first kana. Let's learn a few more. How about the katakana for the sound ah? It turns out that this one also has the capital letter A hiding inside. Well, sort of. It's not quite as obvious as the one in the hiragana ah, but it's still a useful mnemonic to help jog your memory. And I think that is pretty awesome. See what I did there? Okay, let's now cover the next pair of kana for the sound E. To help you remember the hiragana for E, we're going to take a quick trip to tropical paradise. Picture yourself kicked back on a beach in Hawaii. See the end there? Hawaii, right? So you got two E sounds there. And on this beach, you're going to picture two giant palm trees sprouting up to the sky, and the trunks of each of these trees are made with the English letter I, which in this case makes a sound E. And because there's two of them, that can help trigger how you write the hiragana. First, there's a downward stroke that's hooked up at the end, and then there's another downward stroke bending slightly to the lower right. To help you remember the katakana for E, you're going to picture a majestic bald eagle flying through the sky with its wings outstretched, which reminds you of the first downward stroke from upper right to lower left, and its talons hanging down, which is the second vertical stroke, ready to grab a salmon out of the water. So there you have it. Those are 4 mnemonics to help you remember your first 4 kana.
I know Kung Fu.
To learn the rest, I highly recommend Tofugu's free hiragana and katakana learning guides. Each article includes clever, image-based mnemonics for all 46 hiragana and all 46 katakana, just like the ones I've shared here. You can find links to both of those in the description below. But before you run off, I want to share a few more tips to learn kana as quickly and efficiently as possible. Though I just shared the stroke order for these first 4 kana, I wouldn't worry too much about handwriting just yet. In my opinion, most traditional Japanese teachers and textbooks put too much emphasis on learning to write out kana by hand in the early stages of your Japanese journey. They assume that the physical repetition will help you remember the kana through muscle memory. It won't. And that handwriting is a foundational essential skill. It really isn't, at least not anymore. Now, while Japanese handwriting certainly can be useful in the long run, personally, I really enjoy writing things out by hand in my bullet journal. You will get the most bang for your buck if you focus your early efforts on learning to recognize kana first. In the modern world, recognition, that is being able to quickly decipher the hiragana and katakana that you read, is needed far more often than production, that is being able to write out kana by hand. Therefore, I recommend that beginners first focus on learning to read and recognize kana, not mastering proper stroke order and pretty penmanship. These can come later. And what is the best way to boost your kana recognition skills? Well, in a word, immersion. Specifically, extensive exposure to interesting, meaningful Japanese content. So once you've used mnemonics to memorize all the individual kana, your next goal is to spend as much time as possible reading Japanese content. Then with enough practice and exposure, you won't need those mnemonics anymore. Those are actually just a temporary crutch to get you to the point of being able to read. Being able to rapidly decipher kana builds a foundation for full Japanese literacy, creates an immediate connection between sign and sound, and allows you to immerse yourself in real Japanese. Here are some suggested Kana-heavy resources to focus on as a beginner. Read the stories in Duolingo's free Japanese course. These are indicated by an open book icon in the learning path. The stories include a bit of drama to keep things interesting and are written all in kana. Read Japanese children's books. These tend to be written in hiragana alone, include simple language, and provide lots of images to create a clear context. Read manga, especially shounen manga, which literally means boys comics, and shoujo manga, which literally means girls comics. Both are written for relatively younger audiences, so they're a bit easier to understand, and they include furigana next to most kanji, those small hiragana reading guides that I mentioned earlier. Read news articles on NHK's News Web Easy site, which includes news stories in simple Japanese and includes furigana reading guides above all kanji. There are tons of tools out there today to help you learn Kana, but here are just a few of my absolute favorites. Here are a few suggested apps first. Duolingo, which I already mentioned, has an entire section dedicated to learning Kana. Just click on the tab at the bottom marked with the hiragana A, and there you can find tons of gamified exercises to master both hiragana and katakana. Scripts, which is from the makers of the popular Drops app, provides a beautiful, gamified, user-friendly way to practice hiragana and katakana just a few minutes a day. Anki, which actually means memorization in Japanese, allows you to create custom spaced repetition flashcards to master hiragana and katakana, or you can download pre-made decks created by members of the Anki community. And here are a few books that I recommend. Remembering the Kana by James Heisig provides a systematic approach to learn to read and write all of the hiragana and katakana. Then once you're ready for kanji, make sure to check out his popular book, Remembering the Kanji. The first book in the Japanese from Zero series by George Trombley teaches you all of the hiragana and the basics of the language through progressive lessons and exercises. Last, but hopefully not least, there's my own book, Conquer Kana, which shows you exactly how to master both hiragana and katakana, complete with stroke order diagrams and links to pronunciation guides and animated GIFs. I also teach you how to differentiate lookalike kana that can be confusing and my best tips for self-guided kana study. Okay, here now is a recommended self-study schedule to master hiragana and katakana in 2 weeks or less. You can certainly go faster or slower if you like, but I find that about 12 days represents sort of the Goldilocks zone for most learners. It provides just enough intensity to see rapid, tangible progress, while still being a reasonable pace that you can stick to without burning out. Following this schedule, you will learn roughly 10 new kana a day, 5 hiragana and 5 katakana. I suggest spending roughly 30 to 60 minutes per day, broken up as follows. Upon waking in the morning, spend 10 to 15 minutes reviewing the kana from the previous day. Then throughout your day, use little scraps of time to review your kana flashcards. And then right before bed, spend 15 to 30 minutes learning that day's new kana. The reason that I want you to learn this new information right before bed is because we consolidate new memories while we sleep. Okay, let's do it. On the first day, you're going to learn the 5 Japanese vowels and the hiragana and katakana to write them. We actually already did 4 of these earlier, so that's a bit of a freebie. But here's the whole list, just in case. First, there's a, I, u, e, and o. Now again, I don't want you trying to use rote memory to get these into your head. Make sure you go check out the linked articles from Tofugu that include image-based mnemonics to help learn those easily. On day 2, you're going to learn the K column kana, well, that's a mouthful, which combine the initial K sounds with those same 5 vowels that you already learned. So we have ka, ki, ku, ke, and ko. On day 3, you're going to learn the S column kana, which combine an initial S sound with the same 5 vowels. The exception to this is the second kana. So we have sa, shi, not si, but shi, su, se, and so. Now, just a heads up, not to confuse the katakana for so with the katakana for which look very, very similar. The difference is that for so, the first stroke is a bit more vertical, and the second stroke goes from top right to bottom left. For the first stroke is more horizontal, and then the second stroke goes from bottom left to upper right, which is the opposite of so. On day 4, you're going to learn the T column kana, which combine an initial T, ch, or ts sound with the 5 vowels, depending on the kana. So we have ta, chi, not ti, tsu, te, and to. Now that tsu sound, we don't have that sound in English at the beginning of words, but you can find it hiding at the end of some English words like rats. So if you're having a hard time saying it, that's a good little trick. Day 5, you're going to learn the N column kana. So we have na, ni, nu, ne, and no. On day 6, you're going to learn the H column kana, which are ha, hi, hu, he, and ho. That second one's a little tricky. It's somewhere between an H and an F sound, a little bit close to an F, I think. Also note that when it's used as a grammatical particle, the hiragana for ha is actually pronounced wa. There's a historical reason for this, but I'm not going to go into that here. Also note that the hiragana and katakana for he are written exactly the same. This is the only time in Japanese this happens. So bit of a freebie there. Day 7, you're going to learn the M column kana. So we have ma, mi, mu, me, and mo. On day 8, you're going to learn the Y column kana, of which there are only 3. So we have ya, yu, and yo. Day 9, you're going to learn the R column kana. So we have ra, ri, ru, re, and ro. Now, the Japanese R sound is notoriously difficult for English speakers to make, which I suppose is only fair given how difficult the English L and R sounds are for Japanese native speakers. I find it most useful to think of it as being more like a D sound than an R sound, but it isn't really a D either, but it comes closer. You can actually find a somewhat similar sound right in the middle of the word water when said in a standard American accent. So in that case, that T, even though T is usually voiceless, becomes voiced, and it also becomes something like a tap, where the tip of your tongue just taps the alveolar ridge behind your teeth, so it's water. So that's pretty close to the Japanese R sound. On day 10, you're going to learn the 2 W column kana and the syllable final sound. So we have wa, o, and Now, I want to point out that this o, it's written like it's wo, but most modern Japanese people pronounce it just like the o that we learned the first day in the a, I, u, e, o. So there usually isn't much distinction there, but they are written differently. And again, be careful not to confuse the katakana for and that for so. You may have noticed that the voiced consonants for G, Z, and D are nowhere to be found in the kana table we saw earlier. No, I didn't forget them. It turns out that Japanese has a nifty trick for transforming voiceless kana into voiced kana. This is great because it reduces the total number of kana that you need to learn. So for example, you don't need to learn completely separate kana for the minimal pair ka and ga, because the only difference there is one is voiceless and one's voiced. You just have to add a little diacritic mark, 2 little slashes up in the corner called dakuten, which literally means voiced mark. So because of this, all the hiragana for K and G sounds, S and Z sounds, and T and D sounds are all exactly the same, with the exception of those 2 little dakuten slashes in the corner. So for example, here's ka becoming ga, sa becoming za, and ta becoming da. In the same way, you can transform all the other voiceless kana into their voiced sisters. If you are really astute, you probably noticed that the kana table also lacked kana for B and P sounds, even though those exist in Japanese. Once again, this was not an accident or an omission, but rather one more way in which Japanese makes your life a little bit easier by reducing the total number of symbols that you need to learn. In this case, Japanese uses those same dakuten slash marks that we just saw to transform the H column kana into B kana. So for example, ha becomes ba. And you can add a little circle symbol called a han dakuten, or half voiced mark, to transform all the H column kana to P kana. For example, ha becomes ha. But despite the Japanese names, this is not actually a voiceless voice distinction like we saw earlier, because H and P sounds are both voiceless, and H and B are pronounced with different parts of the mouth, so they're not the same kind of minimal pairs we saw with K and G, S and Z, and T and D. So since this day is a bit of a freebie, use your extra time to review all the kana that you've learned so far. Lastly, Japanese also has a set of palatalized sounds called yo-on, which combine kana from the E row with those from the Y column. So for example, when you combine ki with ya, you, and yo, we get kya, kyu, and kyo. And you do the same thing with gi, shi, ji, chi, ni, hi, and bi. As you can see, the Y part uses small kana symbols. So kya is written like this, not like this. And that's all the kana. It may seem overwhelming at first to learn so many new symbols and sounds, but with consistent daily practice, an adult-friendly approach, and the right tools, you can conquer kana in just a few weeks, or even over a weekend if you're ambitious enough. And once you can recognize all the hiragana and katakana, you can start to enjoy the wild world of authentic Japanese content. This is a major step in your journey to master the Japanese language and better understand the Japanese culture. So the choice is yours. Do you take the red pill and enter the exciting world of real Japanese, or do you take the blue pill and stay in the boring world of textbooks?